Hello, historical authors. I'm so excited to start your second book with you today. It is going to be amazing. Why? Because you already have so many skills from your first book, and then we're going to learn some extra skills to make this book even more interesting. Okay? Now, today we're all going to draft our All About chapter. It doesn't matter if it's your third chapter or your first chapter or the order it'll happen in your book. We're all going to draft it together today. And the extra thing I'm going to teach you to make it different from the first time is I'm going to show you how to make an introduction for your All About chapter and a conclusion. Okay? So I want to show you what I did first. Let's get into it. Historical authors, you might remember that my All About chapter, as you see on the top of my planning sheet, is different groups of people of the gold rush. I'm going to cover the Native Americans, the Chinese, Americans, Mexicans, etc., and even African Americans. So what I first did when I knew that is I thought to myself, I need to get my information, I need to gather my sources together so I can find that information. So I looked in my California Studies weeklies, the paper that Ms. Karad and I gave you about Native Americans and about the Chinese, and those two sources gave me all the information I need. I want you to use the sources we gave you instead of immediately going on the internet. That's why we gave you those resources. Okay, so let's check it out. I first collected my information and then I wrote notes. So that's what you're going to do first. So I would, by hand, write your notes, and I want you to do that before you draft. So I decided to organize my information into categories. I thought I'll first talk about the white American miners. I'll talk about African Americans, that's what AA stands for. The Chinese, the Mexicans, and the Native Americans, okay? So I decided I'm gonna have categories when I talk about all about the people during the gold rush, because different groups of people had completely different experiences. So my first thought was, how am I gonna organize my writing? You may not have something about different groups. It might just be according to time or according to whatever makes most sense to you. But for me, it made sense to do categories. And I started with the white American miners because they were the miners who had the most rights. And then I wanted to use that kind of expectation of what their experience was to compare how these groups of people were different. I then wrote down information I could find about them. The ages the people were, where they came from, details, details, details. And I found all these details in my resources. Now I didn't quite finish it because I don't think I need to, just for you to get the idea of write your information down. I could even talk about how women experience the gold rush, so that I can then make sense on how I'm going to draft it. So today you will write your notes and you will start your draft. You do not need to finish your draft today. You will have 3 days to work on it, but you'll have something new to do with it each day. So write as much as possible. Writers, I'm going to show you 2 things right now. I'm going to show you how I turned my notes into complete sentences, and then you're going to watch me improve my introduction to my All About chapter. Step 1, notice how I have phrases and incomplete sentences like 17 to 20 years old, men from the East Coast. I know that means for me that the white American miners were between 17 and 20 years old. They were mostly men, and they were from the East Coast. Notice how I wrote it in complete sentences here. I'll get to my introduction up there in a moment with you. Most white, I decided with my groupings I'm going to do headings, and I'm writing most white American miners were between 17 and 20 years old. Most miners were men because women rarely had jobs and the gold diggings were not considered, and I keep going. And what I want you to notice is my notes are short up here. You see that? My explanation is much longer, because I don't expect my reader to already know this information. When you write your All About chapter, your writing must be much longer than your notes And for most events, you should be explaining who was there, what happened, when did it happen, where, and so on. I'll get into that in a minute in my own essay. Now I'm going to direct your attention up to my introduction, okay? So there's my title, all about different groups of people during the gold rush. I like to think of the introduction as the beginning of the tour of the school, but think of it as like a mini school in this essay. Maybe it's like a tour of the classroom, like a smaller place. And it starts with a kind of a summary of what I'm going to cover without going into too much detail. So check it out. There were many different ethnic groups that came to California during the gold rush. I'm basically putting my title into a sentence. Some of those groups were white American miners, African Americans, Chinese people, and Mexicans. Native Americans were already in California, and their experience is important too. I didn't include them in my list because they didn't come to California. They were already there, so I made them their own sentence. What I want you to notice is I basically put my title into a complete sentence and then told you the different categories that are to come. You will do something similar in your essay, even if it's, there were many parts to the Mexican-American War that led to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where the U.S. gained much of Mexico's land. So you can give a shortened version of it. Now I want to give you some tips on how to write an introduction. So after you have your little summary and you tell your reader what you will cover, I want to talk to you about how to start the chapter besides that. And there's a few things you can do. You can ask and answer a question. You can start with a shocking fact. You can start with a small story, someone doing or saying something. Kind of like the way you could say there's yeller in them hills, and then maybe you then talk about the discovery of gold and what that phrase means. Or you can connect to an earlier chapter. So if you know this is going to come later in your book, maybe you make a reference to the previous chapter that will be happening. So for me, I've decided to start with a question, but any of those options are fine. So instead of just starting with a flat sentence like there were many different ethnic groups that came to California during the gold rush, maybe I could start with a question like, where were all the gold rush miners from? Then this starts to become an answer to my question and introduce you to what I will cover in my essay. All right, so I'm holding this iPad while having my essay. So I'm gonna move this down and I'm going to write, where were all the gold rush miners from? Now I've got my hook. I've got my first opening line, sentence, question. It's going to get my reader's attention. And then the next sentence becomes the answer. There were many different ethnic groups that came to California during the gold rush. So I'm going to tell you, these are where they're from. This is who they are. You might choose to do something different if it feels like a better fit for your chapter, but you do need to do one of these today as you start your all about chapter. Okay, now I'm going to show you how you finish the chapter. Tips on how you conclude or finish a chapter, your all about chapter. You can either do a connection to the beginning of the following chapter, the beginning of the same chapter, or you could do a sneak peek at the next chapter, kind of like, oh, and see what happens after this Bear Flag Revolt with the Mexican-American War. Maybe that makes more sense to you. One that I personally love is explaining why this matters today, because sometimes people think, oh, history happened so long ago, who cares? Well,
That's how the world is the way it is today, so we all should care. Or you might leave them with something to think about, something to care about. So for myself, I would choose for my topic, all these gold rush, like all these miners coming from all these places. Well, it changed California because it made California a place of really rich culture, like rich meaning great variety, people from all over the world. So I might finish my chapter, my conclusion, I might say, now having learned, actually, instead of saying it, let me write it and show you.
Okay, writers, here's my conclusion. So imagine I finished my essay and now here I am at the end. As you can see, the gold fever, because that's what they also called it, the gold fever was very contagious and brought many different groups of people to move and stay in California. This state has changed as a beautiful combination of traditions and cultures because of those people and continues to have people from all over the world. Now that I read it aloud with you, I think I would actually add a little bit of emphasis, say it's changed forever. As a beautiful combination of traditions and cultures, it is today. Because remember, I want to show why this matters today. So I have to add those words like forever and today because of those people, and continues to have people from all over the world. If you want to do a different way to wrap up your essay, you can have leaving your readers something to think about, the next chapter that you know will follow, even though you haven't written it yet, or connecting back to the beginning of your chapter. Maybe you started your chapter with a question. So, that's what we've got going on today. Okay, authors, I realize I just made a silly mistake. I just modeled for you drafting this all about chapter by hand, and we've been typing. You will type, okay? You will type this chapter and all the chapters. Today, your job is to write your notes by hand on a piece of paper, all the information you need. Start drafting your all about chapter using the introduction starters that you saw. Choose one. And my goal for you is to get halfway through the draft, okay? Because tomorrow you'll have new things to add and I want to make sure that you don't fall behind. So please, please, please get at least halfway done with your draft today, okay? Remember to share your document with myself or Miss Karad. See you later.